Hey friends, I'm Otis Gibbs, and this is Stanley Smith. He's going to tell you a great story about Blaze Foley.
Sometime in 1988, it was the beginning of 1989, he had recorded that live at the outhouse cassette. A few days or several days before, after he made that tape, he kind of went on a roll, not particularly good roll. I'd keep hearing things, from Chuck or people saying, man, Blaze is just a mess, but I do know that the day before he got shot, he was at the outhouse. He was with the old man, Mr. January, I think it was his last name. All I know, I've read stuff in the paper about it and seen some stories about it, but everything I know I got from Chuck. And all I know was that he was behaving pretty good that day, and he and Mr. January were drinking beers, and Chuck was introduced to him that day. But Chuck had to go to the bank, and he said by the time he was gone about an hour, and he said by the time he got back, Blaze was just bad news, And they eventually got out. I don't know if he made them leave, but there was a daytime crowd at the outhouse that were the Jeopardy crowd. And you didn't mess with them. If they were doing their Jeopardy thing, you had to behave, no sound checks or anything like that. All I know is the next morning I picked up the newspaper and it was already in the paper. And I says, I was asking Chuck about that when I talked to him on the phone a couple of days ago. I says, how was that in the Austin American-Statesman that morning? Because that's when I found out about it, And Chuck says, well, that night that I had he said, I stayed in the bar all night long, slept under the pool table or something. Chuck is amazing. And he said, the phone rang early in the morning. It was this newspaper asking me questions about Blaze. So already they were working on a story, and it somehow made the print, which I think is phenomenal. But anyways, that set in motion a whole lot of crazy stuff, and just emotions, like including me and my buddy Dave Scheidel. We were both just in shock, What I remember is it was cold. Whew. Yeah, I remember seeing a lot of people in Texas don't have the kind of clothes you need for something, the kind of cold it was. It was the kind of cold that just cut you in two, I remember walking into the funeral home. The cars everywhere and motorcycles. And Dave Scheidel and I went together. There was Calvin, Jubal Clark. There was Pat Mears, who was the wife of Mickey White. But I remember seeing all those people out in the cold outside that funeral home, just like people are just hands in pockets and just really, really bitter cold. And Pat Mears came to greet me and Dave when we got there and took us to a pew. Place started filling up. There was a casket up there with duct tape all over it. People got up and talked. I don't remember. I guess some people, maybe Pat played some tunes, but what I thought when we first got there was, I told Dave, I said, there's another funeral going on the other side of I said, man, what are those people thinking over there? Because it was really freaky kind of scene. So those people probably never forget their funeral. And then after the funeral, I've heard all kinds of stories about afterwards, but we went on home, so I don't know what really happened, but apparently they drove around and people were getting lost, and I don't know. Well, about a day after he got shot, a friend of mine named Larry Monroe had a radio show on the local public station. He started a tribute. And so all these people were coming into the radio show, Timbuk 3. I remember Connie Hancock was there. Just all kinds, everybody that was part of the scene was showing up to do a song and a tribute to Blaze, and people talking. And I heard that at home on the radio going on, and I just picked up a cassette. I don't remember what else was on it, but I just taped over whatever was on it. And I still have it out of my garage. I have the cassette of that show, at least a good portion of it. I mean, that whole Blaze getting shot and dying just totally took over on everybody for several days, just like those kind of things do. But I remember Dave and I we were kind of grieving. And Floyd Domino, the piano player that owned our house, called us up and offered us some sympathy, And I guess he'd finally had Merle Haggard recorded his tune, If I Could Only Fly, which was on the jukebox at the outhouse. And, it was just a heavy time. Now, another thing that I'd forgot about, there was a guy that had a column in the Austin paper named John Kelso. And his column was kind of humor and weird, kind of off-center, I guess. And I remember reading it, it was several days later, about Chuck was having a benefit for Blaze at the outhouse. The rumor had it that these guys were going to steal Blaze. The funeral home was putting pressure on him to get his body out of there or something. They were going to try to steal his body and bring it down to the outhouse. And it says they were going to tape him up on the door. Now, I don't, this is all, I guess it's kind of true. I could see bringing him in there maybe, but not taping him up at the door. But maybe that's just how it went along after a while. But Chuck said that night, the TABC, the Texas Alcohol Beverage Commission, came down and checked on the place to make sure there wasn't a dead body taped up to the front door. I guess he said they did. They showed up, Here's this guy booted out of almost most of the places he would go to. He could only play in that one place, which was, to me, it was true of him and Calvin Russell. All those people were pretty much, that's the only place they could get a gig in Austin. In a way, as somebody I've been around a lot of folk singers and I played on folk festivals, but the kind of people that really are the solid people at a big festival like Kerrville, they're kind of set in their ways. It's kind of, I think of it like a Newport Festival when Dylan went electric. Boy, it was like a war going on about that, Well, the same thing I think is sort of like with people like Townes and all these Calvin Russell, Pat Mears, all these people in Blaze. They're just so far off the center that those people are scared of them, kind of. And I always think, wow, it's just so amazing to me that those people felt that way back then. And now the two most famous folk singers in the whole area were the two guys that they're by far heads and shoulders superstars, in their death.